Take back control. Stop letting algorithms decide your news. Get uncensored history and real knowledge to strengthen your mind, body, and spirit. Watch ad-free content now at iNeverKnewTV.com Premium. Please speak about the U.S. occupation of Haiti from 1915 to the 1930s, and what were the motivations and what lasting effects did it have on the country?
Excellent question. And prior to that, we had 7 presidents who were disposed. Many of them would utilize the Capcos. For those who are not familiar with the Capcos, it was a major rebel group during the Haitian Revolution, especially during the major phase after the Bois Cayman ceremony of August 14, 1791. So during those series of presidents, many of them would oftentimes rely on Capcos fighters, especially from the north. The northern regions is where we have a lot of black populations. The south is mostly controlled by the gens du couleur, the free people of color. Especially where my family's from in Lac Bonite, which is a large farming region. You also have a large peasant population, but also voodoo is very strong there. So once again, the Cacos were mostly located in the mountains and those, of course, agricultural regions. Sadly, the last president, very similar to Jovenel Moïse, would be Guillaume Sam. Guillaume Sam would be disposed, but sadly, he was someone who catered to the elites. So he wasn't clean cut, and he would be killed by the people and the mob because he was not doing his duties as an African leader. And that's something that we're going to discuss a little further if we touch on Ibrahim Touré. To get more into the story, though, this is where it gets interesting. We also have to deal with the context of World War I. What's interesting about Haiti is that when Dessalines said all citizens would be considered black, which is very important, much like Kemet, the land of black people, he allowed the Polish and the Germans to stay. The catch was, though, everybody would be black, even though they're not necessarily African people or black people. What he did was destroy the construction of white supremacy. When you had Saint-Domingue, you had the Grand Blanc, the rich whites, Petit Blanc. You had the gens du couleur, the free people of color, because of course they have to make a proximity to whiteness. And then the black people at the bottom. This is why we consider it one of the most successful revolutions. It's a revolution because he completely dismantled that system of white supremacy to create a black nation, much like in ancient Kemet. So to go back to your question, this is where it gets interesting. Many people portrayed the visions of Dessalines, such as Guillaume Sam, but you had a figure by the name of Roosevelt Bobo. He was, of course, a politician, but once again, he critiqued the elites and, of course, would lead the first Cauca War when the U.S. come in 1915. They had a fear of the Germans having influence in Haiti. Oftentimes, we look at history as separate episodes, but we have to connect those dots. The U.S. has specific interest in Haiti also because we're under 2 tectonic plates. Not only that, we have gold and oil, something they're still interested in. And of course, the U.S. is still imposing on Haiti to this day. So in 1915, they would land and change not only our constitution, because Dessalines had a clause when he established the Empire of Haiti that no white person, no foreigner should own land. When the U.S. comes in, they would change that clause to allow now U.S. corporations, such as New York City Bank, to come in. Other damages include, of course, the creation of Haitian military by the Grand Marais. So not only would they dismantle our own military, but they would create their own puppet military regime. Many of them that will be led by mulatto or white generals. And this is going to also lead to some further issues later down the line when you deal with Francois Duvalier and Aristide. So there's, once again, when you look at the root causes of these issues, we have to specifically deal with not just the assassination of Dessalines, but specifically 1915 all the way to 1936. And guess what? When they come in 1915, right next door, they come in DR in 1916. They'll occupy DR for a shorter time, till I believe I want to say 34. But nonetheless, they occupied IT for quite a long period of time. And the damage was done after that. Oh, and real quickly, I do have to mention that we also fought. One of the most important leaders amongst the Caucos was Charlemagne Pélat. And we see a similar phenomenon. And I know there's some discrepancies. So I'm not going to, try to, let me use my words carefully. I don't want to seem that I'm just praising this particular figure, but it's an interesting similarity when you look at Jimmy Chargé Barbecue, who's also a former police officer. When you look at Charlemagne Pélat, he was a former military officer. But nonetheless, both made claims that they're leading revolution against a corrupt regime. So once again, we can see there's nothing new under the sun. And oftentimes, history doesn't always repeat, but it rhymes.
Can you list some of the companies that are down there and the resources they're extracting from Haiti?
Well, but as I mentioned before, we are under 2 tectonic plates. So we have a lot of gold. We have a lot of, I believe it's rudium, which is even more valuable than gold. Bauxite, which forms your aluminum. You also have a lot of bauxite in Jamaica. as well as other raw natural resources, especially in terms of our agriculture, in terms of the food that we're able to produce to feed ourselves.
And export.
Exactly. We also have to talk about many of our revolutionary leaders who still have the memory of Africa. I'll give you an example first, starting with Toussaint Louverture and his lineage. He's descended from his grandfather Gal Guinou, and they like to say allegedly. But if you travel to the Alada in current-day Benin, which used to be his own kingdom, Kingdom of Alada, there is a statue of Toussaint Louverture because they know his lineage. They know where he comes from, and he does as well. His grandfather is Gal Guinou, who was formerly the prince of Alada, but when his father Soso dies, he will become the king of Alada. This is around 1724. He would be in conflict with his brother Hassar, and Hassar would leave to the king of Dahomey. And I mentioned Agaja and his wife Wangil. Agaja would give him some soldiers, and Hassar would come back, defeat his brother Gal Guinou, and sell him into enslavement. Eventually, he would be sold to the French and would land on the Breda plantation in Saint-Domingue. Toussaint's original name would be Toussaint Breda. So once again, he still has the memory of his ancestral history and his royal line. After all, he could speak multiple African languages. He could speak Fombe. He could speak French. So once again, this shows why he was able to be a very good diplomat. Now, when you look at Jean-Jacques Dessalines,
That makes sense. I never knew that history. It's a bloodline thing with this brethren there.
now you're seeing the deeper connection.
I got you.
Now, when you look at Jean-Jacques Dessalines, he would be raged because his mother would die. And of course, he would give Dessalines to one of her close friends. Her name is Abduraya Toya Mantu. She was a Gojamino, a general in the Dahomey army. And many of you might be familiar with the Dahomey women warriors or the Goji Mino. So once again, she would train him not only in African combat arts or African military strategies as seen in the Kingdom of Dahomey, but give him a clarity of who his people is as well as who his enemies is. This is why Dessalines would not be fooled to make deals with the French. And that context is very important. After all, we all receive a foundation from our family, from our culture foundations, and that's important. That's what's going to allow us to push back against the enemies that are still on our necks today.
You know, it's wild. I never knew about that bloodline history, and it makes sense because I was always amazed at how did this person rise up at such an age, but it was already there. It's been there. It's in his blood. That's his history.
Yes.
Yeah. I never knew that, man. I appreciate that.
Brother, I didn't know this either until I really want to commend my advisor, Dr. Amma Mazama. At the time, she brought me back home to IIT for the first time in 2017. And usually, those of you who are Haitian Americans, you know, you might have some families during that era, you know, are afraid of you getting kidnapped or going back home due to, you know, maybe family or political situations. But when she took me back home, we were able to go to Bois Cayman. We were able to go to my family's hometown of Lato Bonite, Cap Haïtien, Jacques Mel, which is also the house where Dr. Mazama got initiated. But the next year in 2018, she would take me to Benin. She would bring me to Ouida, the source of voodoo. She would bring me to Alada, Porto Novo. And that's when I was able to look at the primary sources. That's when I was able to see the statue of Toussaint Louverture, which is another primary source, as well as hear the oral traditions and the oral stories, both in IIT and Benin, which allowed me to give context for my dissertation and later my book, The African Revolution in IIT, Liberté ou la Mort, Freedom or Death. So without dealing with the primary text and the sources, we're not going to have a long memory of why these things are occurring, why we were able to kick out the French, why we were able to, once again, utilize voodoo to restore ourselves.
What is the real situation in Haiti today, and how has the United States contributed to that situation, both directly and indirectly?
Right now, the U.S. is dictating the destiny of IIT. Not just the U.S. There's an organization known as the Core Group. And you guys might be familiar with Dr. Bertrude Albert or Jemima Pierre. They also touch on the Core Group. For those who are not familiar with the Core Group, it includes ambassadors from the United States, Canada, France, Organization of American States, Brazil, as well as the UN. And these are the ones who dictate who are the prime ministers or the leaders of IIT. In other words, us as the Haitian people, we're not allowed to really choose our own leaders, which is why the youth are rising up. But it gets more complicated when, of course, you have foreign firearms. And, of course, during Jovenel Moïse, you also had a drug operation. And I believe, yes, the CIA was involved when you look at those who were a part of that assassination plot. Some of them were Haitian Canadians or Haitian Americans. And of course, we have to be honest on who the enemy is. Why is it that they want to keep IIT under their thumb, keep it in a state of anarchy and chaos as we see in the Congo and Sudan? We see the similarities. And once again, I want to commend Brother Ibrahim Touré because he understands the game plan they utilized every single time in our history to destabilize us and to create anarchy and chaos so they could say that we can't govern amongst ourselves.